Networks of nerve cells. The networks grow into an elaborate constellation of 7 discrete but interconnected regions highly specialized for producing song. This is his song system. In nestlings that have not yet begun singing, the regions are small. But over the next weeks and months. In one region, the high vocal center, specialized cells make fine distinctions in the sounds the chick hears, noting even the slightest millisecond length differences in the duration of song notes, and firing only when the notes fall within a narrow range. This is the same strategy of pattern recognition we humans use, called categorical perception, to spot subtle sound differences in language, say, between ba and a pa. By the time the young bird makes his first effort at singing, a memory of his tutor's song is already present, solidified in small populations of highly selective neurons distributed throughout his song system. A baby zebra finch in the wild grows up listening to songs of a smattering of different species, just as a mockingbird does. He's capable of learning any of them, yet he learns only the signature song of his species. Sounds from the world flood into the young bird's brain, but only those from his own species begin to carve out permanent traces. It's a perfect example of the intertwining of genes and experience. When a young zebra finch first hears the song of his own species, his heart rate accelerates, as does his food begging. It's wired into him. As the songs he hears sculpt his growing brain, some channels, those tuned to songs of his own species, are pre-selected to become powerful rivers, the connections between the nerve cells in those pathways strongly reinforced, while the smaller tributaries, songs not part of his genetic heritage, quietly vanish. This discovery, that some young birds are capable of learning almost any song they hear yet possess a genetic template that predisposes them to their species' song, has a human parallel. Young children have a remarkable capacity to acquire any of the world's 6,000 human languages without formal training, which suggests that we're genetically predisposed for the task of language learning. Yet we learn only the language or languages to which we're exposed, underlining the importance of experience in the process. If a bird has no tutor, it sings a song that's unrecognizable or only a poor rendition. Baby birds raised without any exposure to a tutor song sing abnormally, usually a very stunted, simplified version of the species' song. This is true for humans, too. Children with normal hearing who are raised without any exposure to human speech utter abnormal vocalizations. The window of song learning for a zebra finch is open only so long. When the young bird starts to sing, he'll imitate the tutor's song only from this early sensitive period. Then around the time he becomes an adult, the gates of song learning close. Why this is so is a puzzle that goes to the heart of our own learning, and its limitations. One neuroscientist, Sarah London of the University of Chicago, has found a clue in zebra finches. A tutor's song actually alters a young bird's brain in a way that affects his future ability to learn, she says. London's research has shown that young birds exposed to a tutor learn easily until they reach the age of 65 days. Thereafter, learning ability shuts down, and the bird's songs remain fixed for life. But young birds isolated from this song exposure can learn well even after 65 days. The experience of hearing another bird singing apparently alters the song-learning genes of the learning bird through epigenetic effects, in this case, says London, through the action of histones, proteins that coat DNA and allow genes to be turned on or off. In birds like the mockingbird, canary, and cockatoo, the gates of learning stay open for longer, so they can continue to add new songs as they grow older. But learning is harder for adults than for juveniles. Languages with incredible speed. In the first 2 or 3 years of life, they can, with little effort, become fluent in 2 or even 3 languages and forever after sound like a native speaker. After puberty, we have to work a lot harder to learn a foreign language and have difficulty speaking without an accent. Some of our neural circuitry becomes fixed during childhood, and for good reason. If our brains were constantly rewiring themselves, they would be neither stable nor efficient. We would learn everything but remember nothing. Still, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to throw open those doors when we needed to, say, if we wanted to learn Urdu at age 60? To my mind, a mockingbird's ability to sing thrush or chickadee at 3 or 4 years is not all that far off from a baby boomer taking on Cantonese. In the second phase of song learning, the young bird begins to explore his voice. At first, he whispers faint random, quavering notes like honey child's, amateurish murmurings or random screechy sounds like a young violinist testing his instrument. Meanwhile, the links between his higher brain regions and his motor regions strengthen, giving the young bird more and more control over his syrinx. Within a week or so, he brings the two sides of his syrinx into close coordination and begins to sing recognizable syllables, though in no particular order. He just takes all the sounds he has heard and memorized and tosses them out helter-skelter. These early efforts are known as subsong, and they're just like a baby's babbling, noisy, variable, exploratory. It's motor play, which helps both birds and infants learn to control the muscles required for song and speech. Scientists have discovered that birds have a special part of their song control brain circuit devoted to this subsong, separate from the part they will later use for practiced song. It goes by the tongue-twisting name of lateral magnocellular nucleus of the nidopallium, or LMAN. The shift to genuine song takes place over the following weeks and months, as the young bird rehearses his tune tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of times. Each time, he listens for errors and corrects them, matching his own vocalization with the song he has memorized. A song well sung offers its own reward, a bolus of feel-good chemicals such as dopamine and opioids. Dopamine may provide the drive to sing, opiates, the reward, the closer the match to the template, the bigger the reward. Sleep seems to play a role in song learning for young birds, just as it does in human learning. A growing body of research suggests that the human brain continues to process the learning of a new motor skill after active training has stopped and during the sleep that follows it. This may be true for birds, too. Zebra finches practice their songs by day and sleep by night. After a young bird is exposed to a tutor's song, neurons in the song production part of its brain fire in bursts of activity during sleep. The pattern of neuronal firing reflects the specific song learned, suggesting that it carries information about that song. After sleep, the quality of a young bird's song deteriorates but then improves with practice the following day. Oddly enough, the more severe the deterioration, the better the imitation of the tutor's song. Who is listening makes a difference in a young bird's performance. If he's singing alone, he's in tune-up mode. This is his undirected song. But if a female is around, he'll muster his best version and sing it over and over in directed song. Even if he's still at a stage when his singing is poor, he manages to direct his motor mechanisms to produce as perfect a song as possible. I've listened to the two versions of these songs, directed and undirected, for dozens of years, says Richard Mooney, and I can't for the life of me tell the difference. But the females can. They care that males are performing in this more precise stereotyped way. Clearly, says Mooney, there's a lot going on in a bird's song that human ears can't appreciate. Brain imaging studies by Eric Jarvis and his colleagues showed that when a solitary male is singing undirected song to himself, the patterns of brain activity differ from when he is singing directed song to a potential mate. When a male bird sings solo, the brain pathways involved in vocal song learning and vocal self-monitoring light up, along with the vocal motor control pathways. But when he sings the very same song to a female, only the motor control pathways are active. These studies suggest an intriguing idea, that the mental and cognitive state of a male bird shifts when he knows he's being evaluated. Mother finches also guide the learning of their sons by offering visual cues like strokes of the wing or fluffs of the feathers, to shift a young bird's song pitch toward that of his father. All of this is powerful proof that social cues shape learning behavior in birds, just as they do in humans. Babies don't respond so much to members of the opposite sex, but their babbling certainly improves in the presence of their mothers. After something like 1 or 2 million syllables of trial and error, the young bird sings a strikingly true version of his tutor's tune. The song crystallizes in a complex system of brain circuitry, but it's not static. For some songbirds, such as canaries, who learn new songs each mating season, the HVC cycles in size seasonally, growing in volume in the spring and shrinking in the later summer. At first, scientists thought these changes arose only from the growth of new connections between cells. But then, Fernando Nottebohm and others discovered that the bird brain actually adds new neurons to its song circuitry. The recruitment of new HVC neurons is part of a process of constant replacement, says Nottebohm. By labeling these nerve cells with proteins that make them glow bright green, scientists can actually see this replacement happen in real time, watching the wandering neurons migrate into the HVC and form synapses with other neurons as a bird learns a new song. What the neurons are looking for and what determines where they end up is one of the puzzles being sorted out in the labs of the scientists assembled in the Georgetown Auditorium. But we do know that this extraordinary kind of neurogenesis is probably common to all vertebrates, including humans. Darwin was right to call birdsong the nearest analogy to language. Not only do birds and people learn song and speech through a similar process, but both have a windows of learning when the brain is most easily wired. In both, a parent or other tutor enhances the learning. While birdsong may not measure up to human syntax and complexity, elements of birdsong look something like it. A new theory by Shigeru Miyagawa and his colleagues suggests that human language arose from a kind of fusing of the melodic components of birdsong and the more utilitarian, content-rich types of communication used by other primates. It's this adventitious combination that triggered human language, suggests Miyagawa, a linguist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In Miyagawa's view, human language has two layers, a lexical layer, where the core content of a sentence resides, akin to the waggle dance of honeybees or a primate's calls, and an expression layer that's more mutable and more closely resembles melodious birdsong. Miyagawa is not suggesting that birdsong literally gave rise to human language. The two systems of communication did not evolve from a common ancestor. But sometime in the past 50,000 to 80,000 years, he says, the two approaches to communication merged in the form of language as we recognize it today. Yes, human language is unique, says Miyagawa, but its two components have antecedents in the animal world. According to our hypothesis, they came together uniquely in human language. If this is true, the big question is how they came together, which remains a mystery. Still, I love this idea that the expressiveness of language may somehow incorporate or reflect the melody of birdsong. There's more hard biological evidence to back up Darwin's assertion of the close kinship of birdsong and language. Both birds and humans use similar brain circuits to produce their vocalizations. Our brains have regions analogous to theirs. Wernicke's area, which controls our perception of speech, is like a bird's song perception areas. Broca's area, which dictates our speech production, is like a bird's song production area. But what's really similar in bird and human brains, and not found in species that are not vocal learners, is the presence of the song or word production areas and the connections, or pathways, linking song perception areas to these song-producing motor areas. In these pathways, millions of nerve cells connect and communicate so the brain can first hear sounds, then produce them. If the behaviors are similar and the brain pathways are similar, says Jarvis, then the underlying genes may be, too. And indeed, that afternoon in Georgetown, Jarvis announces that a massive international effort to sequence the genomes of 48 species of birds has identified a set of more than 50 genes that flick on and off in the brains of both humans and songbirds in regions involved in imitating sounds, speaking, and singing. This difference in activity doesn't occur in birds that aren't vocal learners or in primates that don't speak. So this may be a shared pattern of gene expression crucial to vocal learning in both birds and humans. This news begs the question of how the brains of humans and birds, species separated by so many eons of evolution, came up with such a similar solution for vocal learning. Why would we share similar genes and brain circuits? Jarvis has a theory. In one recent imaging study conducted by his lab, he noticed that when birds hop, genes become active in 7 brain areas that directly surround the 7 song-learning regions of the brain. The brain areas involved in singing and learning to sing seem to be embedded in brain areas controlling movement. This suggests to Jarvis an intriguing notion, what he calls as a motor theory for the origin of vocal learning. Brain pathways used for vocal learning may have evolved out of those used for motor control. Many of the genes Jarvis found in that set of 50 that overlap between humans and birds are active in the same way, forming new links between neurons of the motor cortex and neurons that control the muscles that produce sound. For Jarvis, who trained as a professional dancer, this is an exciting idea. In a common ancestor of both birds and humans, there may have been a kind of ancient universal neural circuit that controlled limb and body movements, he proposes. In the course of evolution, this circuit duplicated and the new circuit was co-opted for vocal learning. This duplication event took place at different times in birds and humans, Jarvis suggests, but the net result was the same: the ability to imitate sounds. It's a case of convergence, explains Johann Boluis, of distantly related taxa coming up with similar solutions to similar problems. In this way, vocal learning evolved at least twice and perhaps 3 separate times, once in hummingbirds and again, either in the common ancestor of parrots and songbirds or independently in both parrots and songbirds. In humans, the brain pathways used for gesturing may have been co-opted and used for speech. People have a hard time with this, Jarvis told me. It's basically a humbling theory because it downplays the specialness of speech and of vocal learning circuits. But it's interesting to note, Jarvis's lab also found that the vocal learning circuits of parrots are organized a little differently than those of other songbirds and hummingbirds. Parrots have a kind of supercharged song system within a song system that may help them pick up different dialects of parrot speech. Jarvis's motor theory may explain how vocal learning evolved. But why is another matter? Why would nature favor as fancy a system as vocal learning in birds, of all creatures, along with all the complicated and expensive brain circuitry to support it? Why is it so rare? Jarvis has a theory about this, too. In spring, a male mockingbird seized by musical daring-do seeks a higher and higher perch until he sits on the topmost twig of the highest tree and, in Thoreau's words, lets rip his rigmarole, his amateur Paganini performances. He even sings at night. He sings leaning forward, wings lifted slightly from his body, throat fully extended. It's as if his own singing turns him on. And perhaps it does. His glorious, frenetic, persistent song is a form of foreplay. It's a love song, and a dangerous one. Up there on his open perch, exposed to the cruel eyes of aerial predators, he does nothing to blend in. On the contrary, he sings to stand out. If he were to repeat the same song over and over, he might have a chance of escaping the notice of a hunting hawk. But in creating one novel sound after another, he leaps to the foreground, as if to say, "Here I am. Here I am. Come get me. Come get me." This, says Jarvis, may be one reason vocal learning is rare. All the varied vocalizations an animal learns make it an easy target. Jarvis suspects that vocal learning may exist on a continuum among animals. Some species, the advanced imitators like songbirds and humans, are at one extreme, and those with limited ability, including mice and maybe some other birds, at the other, he explains. Animals with complex vocal learning are usually either at the top of the food chain, such as humans, elephants, whales, and dolphins, or they're good at getting away from their predators, such as some songbirds, parrots, and hummingbirds. Predators are actually picking off the others, he suggests. To test that hypothesis, you would have to breed an animal for many generations without predators to see if vocal learning naturally evolves. That's a hard experiment to do, but it's theoretically possible. Research by Kazuo Okanoya of the University of Tokyo and his colleagues offers some evidence for this theory. Okanoya studies Bengalese finches, a domesticated strain of the wild-rumped munia, bred in Asia for their plumage, not their song. Okanoya found that Bengalese finches, kept in captivity for the past 250 years, sing more varied songs than their wild relatives. It's in part the relaxed pressure from predation, Okanoya suspects, that has allowed the domesticated birds to develop a bigger, more complicated repertoire. The females of both domesticated and wild finch varieties prefer the larger range of the domesticated song. So what I think is happening, says Jarvis, is that vocal learning is being selected against by predators, making it rare, but it's being selected for by sexual selection. Maybe that's how it worked in humans, too. The idea came to him one day while he was sitting in a park near the gardens at Duke University, reading. He heard a song sparrow singing from the top of a pine tree. I look up and I see him singing really loudly, boldly. He's singing the same song over and over again. I habituate to it. I continue to read. I don't pay attention. Suddenly the song switches. I look up again to see if it's a different bird, and I see that it's the same bird. 5 minutes later, he's switching his song again, and I think it's another. Singing is both risky and expensive. It not only makes a bird more conspicuous to predators, but it takes time away from foraging. So why do birds bother? Because songs well sung are the best tool out there for getting the girl, says Jarvis. Vocal learning birds change their vocalizations so they can be attractive to the opposite sex. Male birds sitting at the top of the tree in broad daylight, visible to the hawks and other predators that might pick them off, are saying to the female, "Here I can sing boldly, loudly, and have all these different imitative sounds." They're basically boasting. Look how well I can sing. Look how well I can imitate. Choose me. The Mockingbird's Paganini performance with puffed out chest is one big emphatic commune, "Hey, babe, check me out." Extravagance in nature is so often found in proximity to sex. For many male birds, competition for a mate is fierce. It pays for a female to be choosy. The stakes are high. She has a vested interest in selecting a male who's genetically fit and best able to defend her nest and foraging territory. One way she measures a potential suitor is by his song. If he's not singing the right stuff, she's off to find another date. What is she listening for? For a long time, scientists assumed that the sheer size of a male bird's repertoire held cachet. But assessing how many songs a suitor sings is a difficult and time-consuming task. It's far easier to gauge how well he does from just a single song or two. Studies show that females of many songbird species prefer to mate with males that sing faster or longer or boast a more complex song. In other words, it's not how many songs he sings, but how well he sings them. Just what makes a song sexy seems to vary from species to species. Female swamp sparrows and domesticated canaries favor trill rates nearing the limit of possible performance, while zebra finches lust for loud songs. Some female songbirds have a soft spot for long or complex songs. Others, such as canaries, are turned on by sexy syllables. This is a real term in the field. A syllable is sexy when a male bird uses his syrinx to sing with two different voices at once. In a sense, it's like he's singing a duet with himself. Female canaries much prefer these sexy two-voice syllables to single-voice syllables. Some females are sweet on the songs of the boy next door. They're looking for fidelity to local song or dialect. Many songbirds have regional dialects with accents as distinct as a Boston Southie or an Arkansas drawl. These dialects are learned and passed along like family heirlooms from one generation to the next. A northern cardinal listening to recordings will respond much more vigorously to the voices of local cardinals than to those of cardinals from a habitat 1,800 miles away. The great tits of southern Germany have a dialect so distinct from the great tits of Afghanistan that the German birds don't recognize their Middle Eastern relatives. Even birds from different areas within a single state in the United States may sing entirely different tunes. According to ornithologist Donald Kreutzma, the black-capped chickadees living on Martha's Vineyard sing a different tune than their colleagues on the Massachusetts mainland. The geographical separation between song variations can be on the order of only a mile or even less. Among the white-crowned sparrows of California, for instance, distinct dialects may be separated by only a few yards. Birds that live on the cusp of two dialects are sometimes bilingual. Like the pronunciation, spelling, and vocabulary of human language, bird dialects may drift over time. Savanna sparrows, for instance, sing distinctly different songs today than their ancestors did 30 years ago. Some time ago, Robert Payne and his colleagues documented the cultural evolution in the songs of indigo buntings over a period of 2 decades. Each bird sang a song in the local tradition learned from his mentor, but with slight innovations. Payne used these markers to trace cultural descent of the bunting's songs. The vocal innovations, it turns out, persist in a population beyond the life of the bird that originated them. Eventually, these create local song traditions and regional dialects that the birds recognize and distinguish. And here's the point where females are concerned: just as a Southie accent may not fly in Arkansas, songs that veer from the local dialect may be a buzzkill for female songbirds, possibly because a male who isn't singing the neighborhood song may have a harder time defending his territory. In Jarvis's mind, it all comes down to modulation. What makes a female swoon in the end is how well a male controls the tempo and precision of his notes, whether in a long, complex song or in a short, sexy syllable. It's like a super stimulus, he says. Like the allure of a big egg to a chicken. Some qualities are just irresistible. And for female songbirds, precision and meticulous modulation in song are about as sexy as it gets. The precision of a bird's song is staggering. Richard Mooney makes the case to his colleagues at the Georgetown Conference by showing two spectrograms side by side. The one on the left displays the vocal patterns of a human speaker asked to repeat a simple sentence 100 times over. The one on the right, the patterns of a zebra finch from his lab singing his stereotypical sequence of syllables and motifs again and again. This isn't just any human, he's a PhD candidate in neuroscience in the audience with us, and he's a straight-A student. Very, very articulate, says Mooney. I asked this student to repeat as precisely as possible the sentence, "I flew a kite." The zebra finch had no instruction at all. Compare the two spectrograms side by side and the results are clear, no matter how hard the diligent student tries. His replications of his own syllables are wildly variable. The zebra finches are nearly identical. In terms of his precision, says Mooney, the bird is like a perfect machine. It's what's known as vocal consistency, the ability to perfectly replicate the acoustic features of a song, the notes, the rhythms, the pauses, from one rendition to the next. To a bird, these subtleties make all the difference. Consider what's involved in this sort of precision, the nervous system issuing exactly the same commands to the vocal motor system over and over again. Accurate coordination of the muscles of the right and left sides of the syrinx, as well as those of the respiratory system. All in a matter of milliseconds, capped off with plenty of stamina so muscles don't fatigue. All in all, not a bad measure of a male's vocal prowess. And indeed, females seem to use precision as a reliable gauge of male vocal performance. Lab studies show that zebra finch females strongly favor males with more consistent courtship songs. Male great reed warblers with more uniform whistle notes have bigger harems. Likewise, male banded wrens and chestnut-sided warblers with unswerving songs get more extra-pair copulations and sire more extra-pair offspring. The same holds true for mockingbirds, those with more consistent songs father more young than, and are dominant over, males with sloppier songs. Scientists are still sorting out just what all this precision and fidelity actually signal to a choosy female songbird. Superior song performance may be a signal cueing her that a male is physically fit. A strong, unwavering song with superior amplitude, duration, and consistency may be a male songbird's way of saying he has good motor control and his body is in fine physical condition. A bird of lesser mettle couldn't muster such a performance. Other qualities, the so-called structural traits of his song. How accurately he sings his tutor's songs, whether the syntax of his song makes sense, and how complex it is, may be his way of saying he was well-fed as a nestling and free from stress and, as a result, has good brain structure and functioning. Sexy syllables in canaries, for instance, require extraordinary coordination of the left and right halves of the syrinx. Listening for super sexy syllables allows female canaries to rule out males with poor bilateral coordination. Because birdsong is such intricate and demanding behavior, it may be a handy and sensitive barometer not only of a suitor's overall health but also of his brain power. It goes back to those critical windows when a baby bird is furiously generating the connections to form the song systems in his brain, says Steve Nowicki of Duke University. At the same time, his body is also growing like mad. A typical songbird nestling reaches about 90% of his adult weight within the first 10 days of his life, an incredibly rapid rate of growth. All those neurons, muscles, feathers, and skin require plenty of nutrition. So it's a vulnerable time. If something happens during those precious weeks, if parents can't deliver sufficient food or if the young songbird endures disease or other kinds of stress, such as competition from siblings, the song circuits in his brain suffer. Birds in captivity that are underfed develop atrophied song structures in the brain and don't copy their tutor's song as well. One study, for example, showed that well-fed zebra finches copied 95% of syllable types from their tutors while underfed birds copied only 70%. It may not sound like a big deal, but to the females, it matters. She can sniff out missteps in his song and judges him harshly for it. In other words, a male bird is deemed only as good as his song. His melody betrays his biography for his entire life. A sparkling song precisely sung, then, may signal a male's superior brainpower and capacity to learn. This cognitive capacity hypothesis suggests that a female chooses her mate based on smarts, using his song as a proxy. In other words, birds that sing better are showing females they're good learners. A superior singer is not only better at acquiring, memorizing, and faithfully producing fancy songs, the theory goes, he's also likely better at other brain-powered tasks, all kinds of learning, decision-making, and problem-solving, such as where, when, and what to eat, how to avoid predators, and how to attract mates, presumably premium traits for a female desiring good genes and/or a proficient food provider for her offspring. However, it's not clear whether a male's song performance actually correlates with his performance on other cognitive tasks. The evidence is mixed. When Neelja Boogert of the University of St. Andrews studied isolated male zebra finches in the lab, she challenged them with a single task, prying the plastic lid off a wooden well to get at food. She found that birds that sang more complex songs, containing more elements per phrase, were quicker to figure out the task than males who sang songs with fewer elements. This suggests that females may be using a male's songs to judge his foraging smarts, how well he learns where and how to find food. Song sparrows on a greater range of cognitive tasks, such as reversal learning and spatial and color association tasks, the more expert singers got mixed reviews. They did better on some tests and worse on others. And recently, in a study of zebra finches in a flock, their more natural, social context, the correlation between song complexity and other cognitive abilities vanished. The finest songsters did no better on problem-solving tasks than the more mediocre performers. Confounding factors may muddy the picture, says Boogert, variables such as stress, motivation, distraction, and social dominance. It's perhaps even trickier to test for possible correlations between song performance and cognition in the wild. Not long ago, Carlos Botero took an unusual approach to the problem. The intrepid researcher, then at the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center in North Carolina, trooped through desert, jungle, and scrublands in several South American countries carrying sensitive recording equipment to capture the songs of mockingbirds in the wild. After recording 100 tracks from 29 species, he found that mockingbirds living in unpredictable climates sang more elaborate songs. In fickle environments where capricious weather, erratic rainfall, and fluctuating temperatures made food sources iffy, mockingbirds not only had a bigger repertoire but were better at copying the songs and calls of other species, with truer notes and more consistency. Perhaps a male's singing skills signal to females that he's clever enough to cope with unpredictable environments, says Botero. This adds weight to the idea that some aspects of birdsong may provide information about a male bird's general cognitive skill, and that sexual selection is acting on these signals of intelligence. It's late afternoon, hours after that first break in the birdsong meeting. I duck outside again to check on the cedar tree. The mockingbird is still in his sheltered perch, singing his myriad tunes, but this time pianissimo. Whether female songbirds use male song as a proxy for general smarts remains to be determined. But one thing seems clear, over evolutionary time, females have shaped the complex, precise, extravagantly beautiful tunes of their kind, and the elaborate brain circuitry required to produce it. As ornithologist Donald Kreutzma explains it, in listening to a male song and evaluating it, the female designs him so that his singing tells her whether he is worthy to be the father of her offspring. By the mating choices she makes, she perpetuates the genes of good singers. With a good being defined by something that lies deep in the female psyche of each species. In this sense, then, the female sculpts in a male a neural song network of miraculous complexity and a brain that rewards him for the precision of his own song. It's known as the mating mind hypothesis. Cognition for complex male displays and cognition for female evaluation of those displays evolve together, affecting the brain structure in both sexes. There's no female in sight of this crooning male in the cedar tree. Maybe his fall song offers that other kind of prize. Birds that sing their songs well in spring and fall experience those rewarding chemicals, dopamine and opioids, but in different amounts in each season, and to different ends. Opioids induce not only a feeling of pleasure but also analgesia, says Lauren Reiters. To find out which season's song produced more pain-killing opioids, writers observed male starlings singing in fall and spring, captured them, and then dipped their feet in hot water. She predicted that birds singing fall song would endure the heat longer. She was right. Fall song, she found, is more tightly coupled to opioid release than spring song. As Darwin wrote, the songs of birds serve mainly as an attraction during the season of love, but after the season for courtship is over, male birds continue singing for their own amusement. Or possibly for the drugs. Imitation, it's sung with such quiet grace it seems he must be singing to and for himself. Perhaps to numb the cold. That's plausible. Or perhaps because when he sings his sweet trilling notes precisely, beautifully, it both eases his pain and quite literally packs him with pleasure. The bird artist. Aesthetic aptitude. Crouch behind the buttresses of a blue quandong tree and watch through a weft of branches. On a sun-mottled spot of the rainforest floor is a bird about the size of a pigeon but glossy blue-black with a bright purple eye. Behind him is an elegant little twiggy architectural hall about a foot high, formed by two parallel arched walls of upright sticks, like a toy teepee built by a child. All around him, the ground is stippled with colorful objects that pop out against a carpet of buff-colored twigs, almost glowing in the dim light of the forest. There are blossoms, fruits, berries, feathers, bottle caps, straws, the wings of a parrot, a tiny toy Bart Simpson skateboard, and what looks for all the world like a turquoise glass eyeball. The bird picks up a flower and drops it nearby. He arranges a feather, nudges a bead, pokes at a straw, apparently sorting his booty by color, size, and shape. Every so often he hops back, as if to survey his handiwork, then hops forward again to rearrange a piece. If you had been watching this bird a few weeks earlier, here on the east coast of Australia, you would have seen him in a pitch of industry. First, he furiously clears debris from an area about a yard square and then sets about diligently collecting twigs and grasses, which he distributes evenly to make his platform. From this collection, he selects choice twigs to plant in 2 neat rows, creating a kind of avenue carefully positioned to catch the morning strike of sun. At the northern end, he arranges his bed of fine twigs, evening it out. This will serve as the background for his panoply of decorations, and also as a kind of dance floor, where he will later offer up some showy pirouette and song. Next comes the business of collecting treasures. Not just any object will do. This bird is bullish on blue, cornflower blue tail feathers from a parrot, lavender lobelia blossoms, shiny blue fruits from the quandong tree, purple petunias, and blue delphiniums stolen from a nearby homestead, along with fragments of cobalt glass or pottery, navy blue hair ribbons. Bits of turquoise tarp, blue bus tickets, straws, toys, ballpoint pens, that eyeball, and his prize, a baby blue pacifier pilfered from his neighbor. These he arranges artfully against his twig canvas. If his flowers wither or his berries shrivel, he'll replace them with fresh ones. Watch for a few more days, and you might see him paint a chest-high band on the inside of his twig hull, using dried hoop pine needles he has chewed and crushed in his beak. No wonder early European naturalists were perplexed when they found these creations deep in the Australian forest, and thought they had stumbled on fanciful dollhouses made by Aboriginal children or their mothers. We are awed by animal builders, perhaps because we're builders ourselves. It's why we marvel at that most familiar piece of avian architecture, the bird nest, especially the ornate constructions of certain species, weaver birds, for instance, who entwine and knot plants to build their elaborate nests, or Baltimore orioles, who knit together their nests with tens of thousands of rapid shuttle stitches, or barn swallows, who make thousands of trips with mouthfuls of mud to fashion their cup-shaped nests on the rafters of barns or the underbellies of wharves and bridges. The implement which determines the circular form of the nest is no other than the bird's body, writes Jules Michelet. His house is his very person, his form. And I would say, his suffering. I thought of this when I saw the tiny cup nest of a white-throated fantail perched atop a single stalk of pandanus along the banks of a river, in the Tanjung Puting region of Borneo. This fantail is a common bird of the open forest there, but its compact little nest is a marvel of clever construction and delicate engineering, perfectly round, barely large enough to hold the mother and her baby bird. I wondered if the birds had pressured the walls with their own breasts and used their bodies to press and knead the materials until they were pliable. The nest was anchored on the top of the stalk with lines of spider silk and bracts of coarse grass, its walls plated with fine grasses, tiny overlapping leaves, the down of tree ferns, and thread-like roots to form a snug, spherical cup. An award for nest-building brilliance should go to the long-tailed tit, a common relative of the chickadee that lives in Europe and Asia. Its nest is a flexible bag composed of small-leaved mosses that form hooks, which are woven together with the silk loops of fluffy spider egg cocoons to create a kind of a velcro. The little birds work to line the inside of the bag with thousands of small insulating feathers, and cover the outside with thousands of small lichen flakes for camouflage, creating a structure made of roughly 6,000 separate pieces. A bird's nest is the most graphic mirror of a bird's mind. It is the most palpable example of those reasoning, thinking qualities with which these creatures are unquestionably very highly endowed. The English ornithologist Charles Dickson wrote that in 1902. Nevertheless, we've long assumed that nest building is a purely innate behavior. A bird comes into the world with a kind of nest template wired into its genes and no real concept of what it's aiming to make. If brains were involved at all, it was only in adhering to a simple set of rules for how to behave, programmed movements that led to the emergence of the fancy egg cup. Nobel laureate Nico Tinbergen noted that long-tailed tits use a sequence of up to 14 motor actions to construct their domed nests, but then remarked how amazed he was that such simple and rigid movements together could lead to the construction of so superb a result. Lately this view has changed, as scientists have stockpiled convincing evidence that nest building requires all sorts of qualities other than instinct. For instance, learning and memory, experience, decision-making, coordination, and collaboration. The magnificent creation of the long-tailed tit, it turns out, is a cooperative effort between the members of a pair from start to finish. It's work that requires a suite of decisions about location, materials, and construction itself. It makes sense, then, that when Sue Healy, a psychologist and biologist at St Andrews University in Scotland, and her learning and nest-building team probed the brain regions a zebra finch uses during nesting behavior. They found activity not just in the motor pathways of the brain but also in pathways involved in social behavior and reward. In an experiment reported in 2014, Healy and her team asked the zebra finch if it could learn to choose more effective nesting material based on experience. In the wild, zebra finches build their nests in dense shrubs from hollow balls of stiff dry grass stems or fine twigs. In the lab, the scientists gave the birds nesting materials of either flimsy, flexible cotton string or a much stiffer variety. After a brief bout of nest building, the birds were given a choice of the two strings. Those that had experience with the flimsy string eschewed it in favor of the more rigid variety. The more nest-building experience the birds gained, the more they opted for the stiffer string. Clearly, learning influenced their choice of building supplies. To see whether the birds deliberately select materials that camouflage their nests, the team wallpapered the cage of male zebra finches in different colors. Then they gave them a choice of nest-building materials, strips of paper that matched the wallpaper and strips of a different color. Most of the birds picked the matching strips, suggesting that they scrutinize the characteristics of their building materials, and don't just serendipitously pick up whatever may be available locally. Village weaver birds, too, learn to improve their choices of nesting material with experience. Young birds prefer to build with more flexible materials and longer rather than shorter strands. As they gain experience, however, they grow pickier, rejecting anything artificial, like string or raffia or toothpicks. They get better at cutting and weaving as well, making fewer mistakes and creating neater, more tightly woven nests as they get older. The twig and object construction of that glossy bird down under, however, is not a nest. That bird, unlike the cooperative long-tailed tit, leaves nest building entirely to his mate. No, this strange and elaborate creation, known as a bower, is built for one purpose only, seduction, by a creature of extraordinary craft and intelligence, the satin bowerbird. So remarkable is the bowerbird family that the ornithologist E. Thomas Gilliard once remarked that birds should be split into two groups, bowerbirds and all other birds. Bowerbirds are noted for the hallmarks of intelligence, large brains, long lives, and extended periods of development. All 20 or so species live in the rainforests and woodlands of New Guinea and Australia. 17 species build bowers. They are the only animals on the planet, except us, perhaps, known to use objects in extravagant displays to lure mates. And there she is. A dull olive-green bird about the size of her suitor. She has been touring the neighborhood, scoping out the workmanship of 3 or 4 other bowers and assessing their decorations. It's her market, so she's shopping around. She lands just south of our hero's bower and hesitates in the undergrowth. She seems to like what she sees. Maybe it's the satisfying symmetry of his architecture that catches her eye. Or that powder blue pacifier. A few moments later, she hops into the cozy little crafted bower and nips at a few sticks, tasting the paint he has carefully applied to the interior of the bower walls. As soon as she lands, the male halts his tidying and quickens. He leaps into a frenetic ballet of hops and dances. With his beak, he plucks up objects from his prized collection and drops them around the floor of his stage. Suddenly, he goes mechanical, buzzing and whirring like a rhythmic wind-up toy. It's less croon and swagger than herky-jerky robot or mannequin. He flicks his wings and fans his tail in quick, shutter-like movements, then runs dramatically across his platform as if attacking an aggressor. Abruptly, he launches into a torrent of mimicry. First, the rolling cachinnating call of a kookaburra, then the rattling machine gun of a Lewin's honeyeater, then the softer calls of a sulphur-crested cockatoo, an Australian raven, a yellow-tailed black cockatoo. He chortles. He buzzes. He squeaks and chuzz. He flaunts his splendid plumage and flashes his bulging eyes, now strangely suffused with red. He pauses, staring fixedly, hops around for a few minutes, then abruptly resumes his display. He thrusts his neck forward and flicks his wings again. Snatching up a small decoration in his beak, a yellow leaf, he hops stiffly to the bower entrance and faces the female, puffing up his glistening feathers so that he looks bigger, and performing a sequence of deep knee bends. The female watches all this showmanship intently, gauging his performance, which may last a few seconds or as long as half an hour. Suddenly, our hero shies violently sideways. The female startles. In an instant, she flits out of the bower and away. The hard truth in the universe of bowerbirds is that relatively few guys get the girl. It is the females who exercise choice in their amours, and they make a very careful selection. Often, one male is lucky many times over, mating with 20 or 30 different females, while other males get no matings at all. The reasons for this inequity are complex and offer an intriguing window into how the bowerbird developed his artistry and smarts. How did a male's penchant for dance and finicky displays of symmetrical twigs and cerulean straws get cross-wired with a female's notion of an ideal mate? Is his artistry an indicator of intelligence or aesthetic sense? The story of the satin bowerbird is a good place to search for answers to such questions. These bowerbirds exhibit pretty extreme display behaviors, says Gerald Borgia, a biologist at the University of Maryland who has studied the birds for more than 4 decades. And females display pretty extreme choosiness. What are they looking for? Male bowerbirds don't offer any direct benefits as helpmates. No assistance with feeding young, for instance, or protecting territory. The only thing a female bowerbird gets from a male is his genes. So she doesn't waste her time assessing his ability to, say, forage. Instead, she scrutinizes his bower and decor, as well as his skill at dancing, mimicking, and other courtship displays. Shopping around takes time and energy, so these demonstrations must signify. Indeed, in every aspect of his display, says Borgia, a male reveals his nimbleness of mind. Consider what it takes to build a superior bower. First, the choice of an excellent location. A savvy male positions his bower to maximize the appeal of his display. The satin bowerbirds that Borja studies orient their bowers on a north-south axis. They seem to be trying to get the illumination just right for their displays, says Borja. Sometimes they prune the leaves around the platform to let in more sunlight. Second, fine craftsmanship. Females prefer bower walls that are superbly crafted, symmetrical, and dense with uniform sticks. So a hopeful male must find straight, slender sticks of just the right length, hundreds of them. These he packs tightly into two thick, curved walls. To make the walls symmetrical, he uses a mental tool called templating. In templating, a male picks up a stick and positions himself along the midline of the bower avenue, explains Borja. He puts the stick in or against one wall and, still holding on to it, pulls it away from the wall, then, using a precise reversal of his movements, he places the stick in an identical position in the opposite wall. Some bowerbirds are flexible enough to modify the technique. When experimenters messed with the bowers of several males, completely destroying one of the symmetrical walls, the birds revealed a surprisingly agile mind. Instead of placing half the sticks evenly on each side, they concentrated their efforts on rebuilding the destroyed single wall. Then there's the deep matter of adornments. Females like decorations, a lot of them, so males hoard their bling. Remove these treasures from a male's bower, and his stock drops precipitously. He constantly adds to his collection, sometimes in unscrupulous ways, stealing from neighboring bowers if their owners happen to be away. Keeping his own bower intact and smartly appointed absorbs all of his energies. Each species of bowerbird has its preferred ornaments and colors carefully selected. For contrast, depending on the environment. Spotted bowerbirds, the scrappy cousins of satin bowerbirds that build their bowers in open woodlands, favor green objects, along with silvery, shiny things, says Borja. They put coins, jewelry, and new nails in the sweet spot of their bower and rifle cartridges further out. We found one bird who had put shiny new nails in the bower avenue and oxidized ones in the back. He was sorting the nice from the not-so-nice ones. These birds often locate their bowers near tips, the Australian term for dumps, where they have ready access to all kinds of glinting, colorful stuff. One bower Borja discovered, built by a spotted bowerbird near the house of a stained glass artist, was filled with little shards of stained glass, which the bird had sorted by color. It was remarkable how he laid out the pieces, says Borja, just like a mosaic. The Vogelkop bowerbird builds a tall wigwam-like structure known as a maypole bower around a sapling tree trunk, in the mountain rainforests of New Guinea. The roof is woven from the stems of epiphytic orchids. On a lawn of moss extending from the bower, the bird creates a beautiful still life of little piles of brightly colored blossoms, fruit, and iridescent beetle wings, red, blue, black, and orange, along with the occasional random treasure prominently positioned, such as a white tube sock with orange stripes stolen from a nearby missionary's cabin. Great bowerbirds, which live in the eucalyptus woodlands of northern Australia, favor a minimalist raiment for their background, largely white stones, bones, bleached snail shells. The pale canvas heightens the contrast for the shiny objects they place at the avenue entrance. The green ones they carefully arrange in lines or ovals on the sides of the avenue, and the red ones scattered at the court edges. These bowerbirds build two elliptical courts linked by a long avenue of brownish-reddish sticks, packing their bowers with an astonishing 5,000 twigs. The female stands in the middle of the avenue while the male courts her. The reddish light from the sticks in the avenue may actually alter her perception of color, heightening her experience of red, green, and lilac, the color of the male great bowerbird's nuchal crest. He stays just out of sight in one of the courts where his colorful objects are stashed. At intervals, he pops his head around the corner to surprise her by tossing an object her way. It's his way of holding her attention. The longer she remains in the avenue, the more likely she'll mate with him. According to John Endler of Deakin University in Australia, great bowerbirds may have another artistic trick up their sleeves: optical illusion. To impress the ladies, Endler argues, the males arrange their collections of stones and bones in increasing size with distance from the avenue entrance. In Endler's view, this sets up the perfect conditions for a visual illusion known as forced perspective. It's a ruse similar to the one used by ancient Greek architects in their design of building columns, tapered at the top to create the impression of greater height, and more recently by the designers of Disneyland's iconic Cinderella Palace. The bricks, spires, and windows of the blue and pink castle get smaller with each consecutive story, so your brain is tricked into thinking that the top of the building is farther away than it is. Filmmakers used the trick in The Lord of the Rings, too, to make the hobbits look smaller. Great bowerbirds apparently do just the opposite. They put smaller objects closer to the bower entrance and bigger stones and bones farther away. To the female looking out from her cozy enclosure, the researchers speculate, this creates the illusion that the court is smaller than it is. The foreshortened stage may make the parading male himself and his colored objects look bigger and more vibrant. The female's brain, like ours, may make false assumptions about what she is seeing. To be sure of this, however, more research on bird perception is needed. What kind of brain power might be required by the male to pull off this bit of visual deception, if that's what it is? It could be a simple matter of trial and error, says Endler, with the birds putting objects at random and then going in to have a look and rearranging them. Or they could be using a simple rule of thumb, put smaller things closer, bigger things farther away, a slightly more complex behavior. Or maybe they have a true sense of perspective and know the order they should put objects in to construct a gradient. One thing we know for sure, says Endler, the arrangement doesn't happen by chance. The birds are deeply committed to their own designs, Endler has found. When he and his team rearranged the white and gray objects in the bowers, the males put things back according to their original design within 3 days. Satin bowerbirds are primarily colorists and choose their colors for maximum contrast. In crafting their bower stage, they lay down a carpet of light-colored twigs and leaves that generates a bright glow in the dusky ambience of the forest. Against this backdrop, they garnish their stage with blue, the rarest of nature's colors. Some scientists suggest that the satin's color scheme might be aimed at matching its own iridescent raiment. But Borja has found that the birds have no interest in decorating their bowers with their own feathers. They just favor blue, which contrasts so well with buff and the green gloom of a rainforest. Humans seem to love the hue, too. Surveys suggest that blue is beloved by more people than any other single color, perhaps because it's associated with beloved objects in the environment, clear skies, and clean water. The painter and colorist Raoul Dufy reportedly said that blue is the only color which maintains its own character in all its tones. It will always stay blue. In nature, blue is unusual in part because vertebrates never evolved the ability to make or use blue pigments. The deep electric blue an eastern bluebird carries on its back is an example of what scientists call a structural color. It's generated by light interacting with the three-dimensional arrangement of keratin in the bird's feathers. Blue objects are relatively rare in a satin bowerbird's world, so the birds often procure them by theft. The store of blue decorations in a male's bower reflects his ability to nip them from the large caches of objects in the bowers around him. Once acquired, these treasures must be guarded against other male bowerbirds keen on taking them for their own stash. Some males visit rival bowers not only to steal but to destroy. This, too, requires quick-wittedness. The bowers of satin bowerbirds are generally more than 300 feet apart, out of sight of one another. According to Borja, ransacking a neighboring bower that is not within obvious view suggests that males possess a mental map of bower locations, and remember them. Borja's research team uses surveillance video cameras to catch the vandals in action. A marauder seeks out and targets another male's bower with stealth and speed. He flies in silently and perches motionless in the branches above the bower, making sure the owner is away. Then he drops to the ground. In an instant he becomes a dark velvet tornado of activity, plucking sticks from the bower and flinging them aside. In a matter of 3 or 4 minutes, an architectural triumph that took days to construct is flattened to a heap of twigs. The brigand steps back to survey the wreckage, spots a blue toothbrush to loot, and away he goes. From a female's perspective, an intact bower embellished with abundant blue objects suggests that this male is adept not only at thievery but at protection against pilfering and vandalism. If satin bowerbirds favor blue, they reject red. Plop a crimson object down amid the blue ones, and the birds will quickly remove the offender, fly off with it, and drop it at some distance, out of view. Some observers even go so far as to suggest that fouling the bird's bower with any shred of red will make the bird madder than a wet hen. Why this aversion to red? Borja thinks the satin bowerbird's color combination of blue against yellow, not otherwise found in the bird's habitat, provides a clear, distinctive signal, a kind of flag for visiting females that calls out, "Here's a bower of your species." Anything red is a polluting presence that disrupts the clarity of the signal. The satin bowerbirds' urge to rid their bowers of red gave Jason Keji, then a doctoral student working with Borja, an ingenious idea. Use this aversion as a powerful motivator to test the problem-solving ability of different males in the wild. Keji wanted to find out whether some males were smarter and if these same birds won the most matings. In one test, he placed 3 red objects in a satin bowerbird's bower and covered them with a transparent plastic container. Then he measured how long it took the bird to remove the barrier so he could get rid of the red objects. Some birds took less than 20 seconds to solve the puzzle, others couldn't do it at all. Most of the birds that solved the puzzle pecked at the container until it fell over and then spirited away the red objects. But one bird perched atop the container and rocked it until it toppled, then dragged the container away from his platform before disposing of the aberrant red. The second test was a bit more devious. Keji glued a red tile to long screws, which he screwed deep into the ground to make the tile immovable. This presented the birds with a novel problem, one they would not ordinarily encounter in their natural environment. The cleverer males quickly discovered a novel strategy to deal with the situation: cover up the red with leaf litter or other decorations. Then Keji correlated ingenuity in the 2 tasks with mating success. The speediest problem solvers in both tasks, it turned out, were also the mating champions, scoring many more copulations than the less competent birds. In other words, says Keji, smart is sexy. Is a bowerbird's bower art? Is the male bird an artist? It depends on how you define art. Like intelligence, the term eludes easy definition. The Oxford English Dictionary defines it as a skill, especially human skill as opposed to nature, cunning, imitative or imaginative skill applied to design. Merriam-Webster says it's skill acquired by experience, study, or observation, and the conscious use of skill and creative imagination. Biologists offer a different perspective. John Endler suggests that visual art can be defined as the creation of an external visual pattern by one individual in order to influence the behavior of others, and artistic skill is the ability to create art. Richard Prum, an ornithologist at Yale University, views it as a form of communication that co-evolves with its evaluation. By these definitions, a bower would certainly seem to qualify as art and bowerbirds as artists. There may be artistry in other bird creations. Some birds decorate their nests exuberantly. Black kites favor white plastic, owls, feces, and remnants of prey. Many birds have an eye for glittery, shiny things. In his Birds of Massachusetts, Edward Forbush noted a report of one male Baltimore oriole who spied a child playing with a silver shoe buckle tied to a ribbon. The bird swooped down and seized the buckle, then wove it into his nest. On the Delaware shore, I've watched osprey bring to their nests shiny ribbons, bottles, and bits of mylar balloons. One osprey nest in Monmouth. Other birds may or may not be drawn to glittery treasures for aesthetic reasons. Only bowerbirds lavishly decorate display areas, seeking out treasures of specific colors and positioning them meticulously to bedazzle females. The naturalist and filmmaker Heinz Seelman once observed the decorating behavior of the yellow-breasted bowerbird. Every time the bird returns from one of his collecting forays, he studies the overall color effect. He picks up a flower in his beak, places it into the mosaic, and retreats to an optimum viewing distance. He behaves exactly like a painter critically reviewing his own canvas. He paints with flowers, that is the only way I can put it. According to Gerald Borja and Jason Keji, a male satin bowerbird does something similar. He sits in his bower where the female will sit, as if he were attending to her viewpoint, and then changes the display accordingly. We're not saying these birds have theory of mind, says Keji, but it is a very interesting behavior nonetheless. What would you call this collecting and sorting and carefully considered placing of colored objects with no apparent function, other than to impress a viewer or evaluator and modify her behavior? To my mind, it seems almost impossible to perceive it except in some relation to art. So where did our spurned male hero go astray? His bower was a paragon of symmetry and artistry. His bright stage was stippled with blue come-ons looted from his rivals. He demonstrated remarkable mastery of vocal mimicry and dance. But the lady of the satin bower, it turns out, wants something more. Gail Patricelli, an animal behaviorist at the University of California, Davis, suggests that successful courtship among satin bowerbirds is not just a matter of brute smarts, artistry, and bravado. Something else plays prominently into the picture, something like sensitivity. Females are drawn in by displays of song and dance that are vigorous and intense, but not excessively so. A moderate wing flipping and buzzing can look a lot like an aggressive display of one male toward another, which is a powerful turnoff for a female. So males are in a bit of a bind, says Patricelli. They need to display intensely to be attractive, but not go over the top, or they may drive females away. Courtship calls for more sensitivity than swagger, more tango, less kickboxing. To see how different males handle this dilemma, Patricelli created an inspired experiment while she was a doctoral student in Borgia's lab. She built a little fembot, a robot tucked into the skin of a female bowerbird. She outfitted the birdbot with several small motors so that she could make it crouch like a real female bird, look around, and even fluff its wings in the mating position. This was Patricelli's way of controlling the variable of a female's behavior so she could measure male responses. The fembot did its thing the same way each time, and Patricelli video recorded the responses of 23 different males. The videos revealed that males vary a lot in their sensitivity to how a female responds to their display. Some males are attentive. If a female seems alarmed, they will rein in their display, tempering their wing flipping and giving her some distance. Other males are oblivious. The responsive dudes, it turned out, are those that secure the most matings. Males who go overboard in demonstrating their intensity and power lose out. In other words, says Patricelli, sexual selection seems to favor both the evolution of elaborate display traits and also the ability to use them appropriately, and this may be where our hero fell short. He lacked social grace. Intensity to suit your date, according to Gerald Borgia, these are extravagant behaviors a satin bowerbird is not born with but must acquire when he's young. Here, perhaps, is another clue for females. The quality of a male's display, like the precision of a songbird's song, indicates his ability to learn as a juvenile. And, as with song learning, this may be a sign of his cognitive capacity. The genetic payoff for being one of the lucky guys is big. Very big. So males work hard at learning to build the finest possible display and intensely practicing their courtship skills. In fact, these birds devote little of their waking time to anything else. Young males build rotten bowers, says Borgia. Because they fail to select sticks of different lengths and sizes and place them at proper angles to produce rounded walls, as adults do, their bowers end up a sloppy mess. Also, the juveniles will use ridiculously thick sticks, says Jason Keji, making it even harder for them to build a nice, tidy bower. And another funny thing, adds Keji, juveniles will work together on the same practice bower, but not collaboratively. So a male will add sticks, another male will come and destroy what's built and start over, then another will pop in and add a few more sticks, and so on. The young birds get better at the task over time, mainly by emulating their seniors. They visit the bowers of other males and sometimes help out by building onto an existing bower or just adding a stick or two to the walls. They also paint on bowers belonging to other males. The juveniles watch their elders for tips on displaying, too. This requires a bit of fancy role-playing. When a young male visits the bower of a mature male, he often plays the female's part while he closely observes the older male. He may be a bit more fidgety than his feminine counterpart, but the older bird tolerates his presence because the mentor, too, benefits from practicing with a live audience. It's a win-win situation, says Borgia, otherwise you can bet it wouldn't happen. Think of it. To win a mate, a male satin bowerbird must be artistic, smart, sensitive, athletic, handy, and a good learner. A choosy female, for her part, must have considerable brainpower to size up all these qualities. As Jason Keji observes, mate choice is a demanding cognitive process. It involves narrowing down the candidates throughout the season, visiting male bowers for first courtships, and returning for more courtships before finally deciding to copulate with a particular male. A female must zero in on the location of male bowers, which are often well concealed beneath shrubs and sometimes a few miles apart, requiring a mental map of sorts, and she must remember them from season to season. She must assess building skills and count decorations, or at least estimate the numbers. She must taste the paint on that chest-high band lining the inside of the bower, possibly a chemosensory signal for her to use in assessing a male as a potential mate. She must evaluate a male's display, listening for accurate mimicry and gauging the vigor and skill shown in his fancy footwork and the intensity and power of his performance, all the while dealing with her fear of attack. She must accomplish all this quickly, it won't do to take all day. Then she must compare any single suitor with all other available males, in addition to considering her past choices and how they turned out. It turns out to be very similar to a search for job candidates, says Gail Patricelli. First a resume check, then a short interview, then a longer interview. Models from economics having to do with finding good job candidates turn out to predict female bowerbird behavior well. Each time a female bowerbird encounters a new male, she must compare him with her memory of previously encountered males. But why is SHE so choosy? Why bother to search for a male who's good at learning, decorating, mimicry, dancing, and problem-solving? One explanation is that females may use a male's bower the way female songbirds use male song, as a way to evaluate his overall genetic fitness, including his cognitive ability. The many display traits and code information the female needs to know about the male in order to judge his fitness as a mate, that he comes from a good egg, that he has no parasites, that he has stamina, fine motor skills, and superior cognitive abilities. According to Keji and Borja, it's in the totality of a male's display, bower, decor, song, and dance, that females may read his full worthiness as a sire, and perhaps especially his cognitive capacity. All of these elements of the male display seem to have some component of cognition, says Borja. Each trait can tell a female something about the male, adds Keji. For instance, the number of blue decorations indicates his competitive ability. The number of snail shells offers information about his age and his survival ability. His mimicry suggests his learning and memory capacity. And his bower construction reveals his motor coordination and skill. A single display trait is not necessarily a reliable measure. So a female uses all of these traits together to get a more accurate indicator of a male's overall quality, Keji explains. It's like a sexually selected intelligence test of males complete with a total score, but also scores for different categories. To the extent that these things are important to females, then she's choosing cognitively capable males, explains Borja. But he cautions, one can debate to what extent cognition is something purposefully chosen by the female, or whether it's that males with better cognition can put on better displays. In any case, a wise female satin bowerbird appears to seek males with superior displays. Perhaps she picks so carefully so that her offspring will inherit quality traits such as good health, a strong immune system, vigor, and intelligence. It's called the good genes model. That's one idea. There's another, more radical idea. Female bowerbirds and peacocks and other choosy female birds may be drawn to gorgeous bowers and displays because they're gorgeous. This was Charles Darwin's really dangerous idea, says Richard Prum, that colorful feathers or beautiful bowers can do two things at once. They can advertise desirable qualities like vigor and health. But they can also just be desirable qualities in and of themselves, without communicating any special meaning about fitness. As Ronald Fisher suggested in his pioneering model of sexual selection, certain extravagantly beautiful traits, even when not useful, may have evolved simply because they were preferred by the opposite sex. As Prum points out, Darwin's idea that female animals might appreciate beauty for its own sake was also daring for this reason. Males may gradually evolve beautiful traits, Darwin proposed, whether splendid feathers or song or bower, through the preference of the females during many generations. Male peacock feathers, for instance, co-evolved with the aesthetic sense of the female, who appreciates the glorious colors and patterns. In the case of the bowerbird, the beauty of the bower is shaped by the perception of the female. In other words, her mind shapes male display. She is the architect of the male bird's artistic creation and the brains required to achieve it, just as the female songbird is the architect of the male's elaborate song and the fancy neural networks that. If the female bowerbird is indeed the artist who, by selection over long generations, helps to create these stunning bowers, it raises the question of how she may perceive beauty. Do bowerbirds have an aesthetic sense? Do they perceive beauty in the same way we do? Shigeru Watanabe explores the thorny question of how another creature may experience aesthetics at his lab, in Keio University in Japan. Some years ago, Watanabe tested the ability of birds to discriminate between human paintings of different styles, for example, Cubist from Impressionist. In the earliest such study, he trained 8 pigeons to distinguish between the works of Picasso and Monet. The pigeons came from the Japanese Society for Racing Pigeons, the paintings, from photos of reproductions in an art book. The experimenters trained the pigeons to spot 10 different Picassos and 10 different Monets by rewarding them when they pecked at the pictures. Then they tested the birds with new paintings by the artists, never seen during training, and with paintings by different artists in the same style. Not only could the pigeons pick out a new Monet or Picasso, they could also tell other Impressionists from other Cubists. To probe whether birds might be capable of making distinctions based on human concepts of beauty, Watanabe trained pigeons to distinguish between good and bad paintings, as defined by human critics. He found that the birds could indeed pick out the beautiful from the ugly using cues of color, pattern, and texture. All well and good, but do birds prefer any particular style of painting? To find out, Watanabe's team created a rectangular birdcage designed to resemble a hallway in an art gallery. Along the hallway were stationed screens showing different painting styles, traditional Japanese-style paintings by ukiyo-e, as well as Impressionist and Cubist paintings. The scientists timed how long the birds perched before each kind of painting. This time the art critics were 7 Java sparrows. 5 of the 7 appeared to favor Cubism over Impressionism. 6 of the 7 showed no clear favorite between the Japanese and Impressionist paintings. Still, this was the first study attempting to show that animals other than humans may have preferences in human paintings. More recently, research has shown that distinguishing painting styles, using color, brushstroke, and other clues, is not at all unique to humans. Indeed, scientists have trained honeybees to tell a Picasso from a Monet. This is easy stuff to poke fun at. The idea that birds and bees play favorites with human art looks a lot like anthropomorphism. But Watanabe's work is less about whether birds prefer Braque to Monet than it is about their powers of acute observation and discrimination of color, pattern, and detail. Birds are visual creatures. They make quick decisions based on visual information from heights at great speed. Pigeons shown a series of landscape photographs taken successively can detect slight visual differences that are hard for humans to pick out. They can also recognize other pigeons by sight alone. So can chickens. Just because the powerful little central nervous systems of pigeons or bowerbirds are organized very differently from our own doesn't mean they're less capable of exceptional visual perception and fine discriminations. Consider the business of evaluating subtle movements in dance. Some female birds, it turns out, are mind-bogglingly good at this. The golden-collared manakin, for instance, a bird known for its astonishing acrobatic courtship displays. In manakins, as in bowerbirds, a male's chances of mating rely on female assessment of his display. Male manakins perform a jump snap display. It starts with a leap between little saplings. Then, mid-jump, the bird flips its wings upward in a noisy wing snap. On touching down, it quickly swivels its body into a beard-up statuary position to show off its bright yellow beard, or throat feathers. It's a supremely difficult move, requiring exquisite neuromuscular coordination and great stamina. Think of a gymnast nailing a perfect landing. Like bowerbirds, only a small number of male golden-collared manakins win the most matings. In the hopes of finding out what distinguishes the winners, a team of experimenters recently used high-speed cameras to record the displays of wild male mannequins. They discovered that females prefer males that perform dance moves at a higher speed. But the difference between the beard-up rond de jambe of one male and the next is measured in mere milliseconds. The capacity of females to discriminate slight differences in male choreographed motor patterns has previously been shown only in humans, say the researchers. I think I could distinguish a bad ballet dancer from a good one. But could I tell a 3.7-second grand jeté from a 3.8-second one? Somehow, the female golden-collared mannequin registers these whiskers of temporal difference. When scientists looked at the brains of both males and females of the species, they found specialized motor control circuitry in males and specialized visual processing circuitry in females. Further research into several different mannequin species revealed a tight correlation between the complexity of a male mannequin's display and the weight of his brain. In birds, it seems, sexual selection for acrobatic motor behavior can drive the evolution of brain size. The mannequin brain, write the scientists, has been shaped by evolution to support both male performance and female assessment of courtship display. More evidence for the mating brain hypothesis. When it comes to artistry or display, birds are capable of making subtle visual distinctions, just as we are. But as scientists are quick to note, we must be careful to consider this in light of the bird's umwelt, or sensory and cognitive world. Animals view the world with different sensory systems than our own. Color, for instance, is not a property of the physical world but the fabrication of whatever visual system may process and analyze it. Birds have possibly the most advanced visual system of any vertebrate, with a highly developed ability to distinguish colors over a wide range of wavelengths. We have 3 kinds of cone cells for color vision in our retinas, birds have 4. Some species of birds are sensitive to the ultraviolet end of the spectrum, where we're blind. Moreover, in each of a bird's cone cells is a drop of colored oil that enhances its ability to detect differences between similar colors. We don't know if there are differences in how the bowerbird brain processes colors, says Gerald Borgia. Our experiments with decoration color use in satin bowerbirds provide no evidence that they're seeing much differently than we are. 3 species, however, the great, the spotted, and the western bowerbirds, may see into the UV part of the spectrum. In other words, a bowerbird's array of objects may look much the same to the bird as it does to us, or it may glow and sparkle in ways we can't imagine. Still, some of the cues birds use to make visual judgments may be rooted in universal principles of beauty, or at least attractiveness, such as symmetry, pattern, and contrasting colors. Experiments in the 1950s, for instance, showed that crows and jackdaws have a distinct preference for regular, symmetrical patterns. Nobel laureate Carl von Frisch once wrote, "Those who consider life on Earth to be the result of a long evolutionary process will always search for the beginning of thought processes and aesthetic feelings in animals, and I believe that signature traces can be found in the bowerbirds." Given the shared biology in the nervous systems of birds and humans, wouldn't it be wrong to presume that there is nothing in common between our aesthetic sense and theirs? When I asked Gerald Borgia if he thought bowerbirds might have an aesthetic sense, a special feel for the beautiful, he said he had no idea. Over time, the birds seem to be able to build up a kind of image of what their decoration display should look like, he told me. It's usually older birds that seem to have this, and then when the younger birds take over the bower, they don't appreciate what's there. Case in point, after that spotted bowerbird who collected stained glass died, another spotted bowerbird appropriated his bower. But the newcomer just piled up the shards, says Borgia. He didn't seem to know what to do with them. As to whether this indicates an aesthetic sense in the older males, I find that terminology slippery, so I try to avoid it, says Borgia. I know what beauty looks like to me. I think their bowers are beautiful, but I don't know if that's the reason they built them that way. It's true. We haven't the slenderest notion of what a male bowerbird really thinks of his display. But we do know that he does not waste time or make a fool of himself chasing after the ladies. Instead, he gathers up the blue objects of his world and lays them out. He designs. He builds. He sings. He dances. The female, with great acuity, marks his efforts. Sharp, attentive, creative. If she likes what she sees, she offers him her body. And so it goes. A mapping mind. Spatial ingenuity. Imagine you're somewhere in Canada driving south toward the lower 48 states. It's late fall, and you're heading to a cottage in warmer climes hundreds of miles down the road. Suddenly, you're plucked from your car, bundled into a sealed vehicle, and taken to an airport. The next thing you know, you're jetting across the country blindfolded, with no idea where you're going. After several hours in the air, you land, and you're immediately hustled into another sealed van and taken to an unknown location. When you're finally freed, none of your surroundings is even vaguely familiar. You have no access to GPS, no map or landmark or compass. But you must nevertheless find your way back to that cottage you were heading for, though it's now somewhere across the country, thousands of miles away. How would you fare? That's pretty much what happened to a flock of white-crowned sparrows not long ago. These little songbirds, with their crisp black and white striped crowns, each a single feathered ounce of fortitude, normally migrate from their breeding grounds in Alaska and Canada to their wintering grounds in Southern California and Mexico. One day, when a flock of sparrows was passing through Seattle on their way south, researchers captured 30 of the birds, 15 adults and 15 juveniles. They packed the sparrows into crates and flew them by small aircraft all the way across the country, 2,300 miles from their normal migratory flight route, to a release site in Princeton, New Jersey. There they let the birds go to see if they could find their route back to their wintering grounds. Within the first few hours of release, the adult sparrows had reoriented themselves and set off traveling solo across the country, aiming directly at Southern California and Mexico. Even the youngest adults, who had made only one migratory journey in their brief lives, found their bearings and headed for their winter home. A white-crowned sparrow may be nut-brained, but it's far more gifted at navigating than most modern humans. We have our mental maps, all right, created by learning the relationships between familiar landmarks, say, where the post office or the bakery sits on a familiar street grid. But this is something else. That a sparrow transported far beyond its known territory seems to know exactly how to get back on course, is one of the astonishments of the bird mind. A good memory doesn't explain it. And neither do theories that focus solely on instinct or eyesight or magnetic cues or sensitivity to the azimuth of the sun. As Julia Frankenstein, a psychologist at the University of Freiburg Center for Cognitive Science, writes, navigating, keeping track of one's position and building up a mental map by experience is a very challenging process. It involves such cognitive skills as perception, attention, calculating distances, approximating spatial relations, decision-making, all very hard work, even for our big mammalian brains. How do birds do it? The ability was once thought to be innate in birds, a matter of instinct. Now we know that bird navigation involves sensing, learning, and, above all, a remarkable ability to build a map in the mind, one far bigger than we ever imagined and made of strange and still mysterious cartography. Much of what we know about how birds find their way we've learned from a humble species, a bird that, for hundreds of years, has been subjected to a version of the experiment endured by those white-crowned sparrows, the pigeon race. Sometimes known as the poor man's horse race, pigeon racing involves first training the birds by releasing them from a basket at locations they've never seen at greater and greater distances from their lofts. Eventually, the pigeons can be relied on to return from distances up to 1,000 miles, beelining homeward over wide stretches of unknown country at speeds averaging 50 miles per hour. Most make it home, though not all. Take the story of Whitetail. One April morning in 2002, pigeon racer Tom Roden saw a bird with a pale tail flutter to a landing in his loft at Hattersley, Hyde, near Manchester, England. The pigeon looked vaguely familiar. Roden, a longtime pigeon fancier and racer, checked the registration ring on the bird's leg and realized it was his own racing bird, which had vanished 5 years earlier during a race across the English Channel. Whitetail's disappearance had been something of a riddle. He was no ordinary bird, in fact, he was a champion, winner of 13 races and veteran of 15 channel crossings. But this had been no ordinary race. Its catastrophic failure earned it the moniker the Great Pigeon Race Disaster. The race was held in honor of the Royal Pigeon Racing Association's centenary celebration. Early on a Sunday morning in late June 1997, more than 60,000 homing pigeons were released at a field near Nantes in southern France to fly home to their lofts all over southern England. At 6:30 a.m., the air whistled with the sound of pigeon wings as the birds whooshed into the sky for the journey north 400 to 500 miles. By 11 a.m., the vast majority of the feathered racers had flown 200 miles to the edge of France and launched out over the English Channel. Then something happened. In the early afternoon, fanciers in England waited at their lofts for the fastest birds to arrive. But as the hours ticked by with no sign of wings in the sky, the disappointed sportsmen scratched their heads in bafflement and dismay. Finally, a few birds straggled in, including some of Rodin's racers, the slowest in his loft. But no whitetail. The champion bird, along with tens of thousands of other experienced racers, never made it home that day. The reason for their disappearance remains mysterious, though clues have emerged. Fast forward 5 years to that cool April morning. Rodin had just stepped out to walk his dog when he spotted whitetail. "I was absolutely amazed," he told the Manchester Evening News. "I always said I thought whitetail would one day make his way back. But even I'd given up hope of seeing him again." The Great Pigeon Race disaster was notable because of its rarity. Racing pigeons seldom go astray, the vast majority make it back to their lofts, even when the distances are great. A good example is red whizzer Pensacola, a beautiful red checker cock, opal with a ruby bib and eye, who arrived at his home in Philadelphia after traveling 930 miles from a release site in Pensacola, Florida. The New York Times reported that the distance was the greatest yet covered by a homing pigeon either in this country or abroad. The winning bird was bestowed with a golden leg band inscribed with his loft and register number and retired from his duty as a flyer. That was in 1885. Homing pigeons have since repeated this feat, and much greater ones, thousands of times, in races around the world. Calamitous losses, called smashes or busts, do occasionally occur. A year after the English Channel disaster, for instance, 3,600 homing pigeons were released in races in Pennsylvania and New York, and only a few hundred made it home. No one knows why. Is it surprising that racing pigeons occasionally become a cropper? As homing pigeon expert Charles Walcott puts it? Or is the bigger wonder how they normally find their way home from places they've never been? It may seem obvious that a bird would remember yesterday's route to that field full of grubs or the way back to the warm, dry hollow of its nest hole. But finding a route home over hundreds of miles is another matter. Even the remarkable journeys of homing pigeons pale in comparison with the jaw-dropping voyages of long-distance migratory birds, lately illuminated by new technology. Birds wearing tiny geolocator backpacks have revealed the details of their marathon migrations. The tiny blackpoll warbler, a bird of boreal forest, leaves New England and eastern Canada each fall and migrates to South America, flying non-stop over the Atlantic to its staging grounds in Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Greater Antilles, a flight of up to 1,700 miles, in just 2 or 3 days. The Arctic tern, a bird who lives by his love of long daylight and bent for high mileage, circles the world in orbit with the seasons, flying from its nesting grounds in Greenland and Iceland to its wintering grounds off the coast of Antarctica, a round trip of almost 44,000 miles. In an average 30-year lifetime, then, a tern may fly the equivalent of 3 trips to the moon and back. How in the world does it find its way? How does a red knot resting at Cape May on its spring journey north from Tierra del Fuego know how to pinpoint last year's breeding grounds in the distant northern Arctic? How does a European bee-eater traveling south from its summer season in a farm field in Spain find a course over the Sahara to its familiar patch of West African forest? How does a bristle-thighed curlew or a sooty shearwater steer homeward over a vast and featureless expanse of sea? As one who gets easily lost in a small patch of woodland, I'm in awe of the navigating abilities of birds. How can they accomplish a feat few humans can carry out even with the help of a compass? The domestic pigeon, Columba livia, is a good bird for probing such questions. Pigeons have a bad rap as gutter birds, rats with wings, pecking savagely at bread crumbs beneath park benches or rummaging in our city dumps. They're considered by some to be as dumb as a dodo. It's true that the forebrain of a pigeon has only half the neural density of a crow's forebrain. It's also true that pigeons may fail to realize that an egg or a squab is theirs unless it is immediately beneath them. They will accidentally trample their young to death or toss them from the nest. Although, as one pigeon expert points out, the squabs are so small and the pigeon's feet so comparatively large that the wonder is that more squabs are not trampled to death. Pigeons are also notoriously inefficient nest builders, carrying only a single twig or coffee stirrer at a time, whereas sparrows will ferry 2 or 3. And if a bit of nesting material drops midair, a sparrow will swoop down to catch it, while a pigeon will let it fall and fail to retrieve it. So by some measures, yes, they may seem dim-witted. But in truth, they're far more bookish than you might imagine. They're handy with numbers, for instance, capable not only of counting but also of grasping the arithmetic of loss and gain and learning abstract rules about numbers, abilities on par with primates. They can, for example, put images picturing up to 9 objects in proper order from lowest to highest number. They can also determine relative probability. Mathematicians, at solving certain statistical problems, the Monty Hall dilemma, for instance, named for the host of the old television game show Let's Make a Deal. In the original game show, a contestant tried to guess which of 3 doors concealed a grand prize, such as a car. The other 2 doors harbored a booby prize, such as a goat. After the player chose a door, one of the remaining doors was opened, revealing no prize. The contestant was then given the option of staying with the initial choice or switching to the other unopened door. In a laboratory version of the game, pigeons solve the puzzle successfully, picking the right door, more often than humans. Most human players opt to stay with their first choice despite the fact that switching doors would double their chances of winning. Pigeons, in contrast, learn from experience and go with the odds, switching their choice. The puzzle appears to defy logic. It would seem that with 2 unopened doors remaining, your chances would be 50-50 that the prize was behind one of them. But in truth, switching doors will give you a 66% chance of winning. Here's why: the probability that you picked the right door initially is 1 in 3. So there's a 2 in 3 chance that you picked the wrong door. When Monty opened the door with the goat, those odds remained. This means the other door had a 2/3 chance of being the right door. I know. I still have trouble getting my head around this. So do many mathematicians. But apparently, pigeons do not. Initially, the birds choose randomly, but eventually they learn to switch. Their successful approach to the problem calls for the use of empirical probability, that is, observing the outcomes of numerous trials and adjusting one's behavior accordingly to win a reward. More often than not, pigeons adopt optimal strategies for this, maximizing their chances of winning, whereas humans fail to do so, even after extensive training. Pigeons are also good at making distinctions as to whether sets of objects are identical or not, a skill the American psychologist William James once called the very keel and backbone of our thinking. They certainly aren't the champions of this skill. That honor may belong to Alex, the African gray parrot that Irene Pepperberg so brilliantly studied before his demise in 2007. Alex was not only nearly flawless in stating whether 2 objects were the same or different with respect to color, shape, or material, but could say none if there were no similarities or differences. He could also categorize more than 100 objects based on these characteristics. Still, pigeons do very well at distinguishing arbitrary visual stimuli such as letters of the alphabet and, as we know, the paintings of Van Gogh, Monet, Picasso, and Chagall. They can differentiate between photographs that contain human beings and those that do not. They're highly skilled at recognizing the identity of a human face and even reading its emotional expression. They can learn and recall more than 1,000 images, storing them in long-term memory for at least a year. And to the point here, they're a far cry better than we are at finding their way in the world, without the benefit of technology. Because of this, they have found themselves in the position of lab rat with wings, at the pointy end of investigations trying to fathom the mystery of how bird navigation works. Lately I've been pondering the pigeons that flock together like hooded monks or tourists on the bricks of our downtown public spaces. The more I see of these birds, the more I like them. They may be shy, nervous of novelty. But they're also scrappy and adaptable. Up close, their crops are iridescent with rainbow. Thanks to breeding since ancient times, there are dozens of pigeon varieties. Fancy ones like tumblers, priests, nuns, fantails, and dragoons have been bred for appearance and show, sometimes to extravagant effect. Homing pigeons are bred to home and to race. The typical feral ones you see in American cities descend from escaped tame immigrant homing pigeons brought to the nation on ships, with European settlers in the early 1600s, the first exotic birds to arrive on these shores. The city slickers I see do a lot of walking, swaying their stubby bodies back and forth like ducks, and sometimes pulling themselves upright to strut with crisp little soldier-like marching steps. They seem wary of perching in trees, instead beating our telephone wires with their plump bodies, or tucking into the architectural nooks and crannies, the capitals, abutments, girders, corbels, and scrolls of city bridges and buildings, tails mashed vertically against the wall. This penchant for skimpy ledges has always struck me as an odd predilection and uncomfortable. Why would the common pigeon shy away from high arboreal perches and favor narrow ledges? Because it descends, like all domestic pigeons, from the wild rock dove, a bird that nests in the sea cliffs and rocky islands of the Mediterranean. Rock doves forage for seeds in nearby fields and then return home with food for their squabs. It was in this context that the dove's natural ability to navigate homeward probably evolved. Humans have exploited the pigeon's homing instinct for at least the past 8,000 years. That's according to the Bible of Dovelit, the Pigeon, first published in 1941 by Wendell Mitchell Levi, a pigeon fancier, scientist, and first lieutenant in charge of the pigeon section of the United States Army Signal Corps during World War I. Wherever civilization has flourished, there the pigeon has thrived, Levi writes, and the higher the civilization, usually the higher the regard for the pigeon. Through the centuries, homing pigeons have been used as fleet messengers, couriers, and spies, by ancient Romans to announce victories in the Colosseum, by Phoenician and Egyptian sailors to herald the arrival of ships, by fishermen proclaiming catches, and by bootleggers passing word between ship and land bases during Prohibition. It's said that the Rothschild Bank learned early of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo by pigeon courier and shifted its investments. In the mid-19th century, Paul Julius Reuter launched his news service with pigeon posts carrying stock prices between Aachen and Brussels. And in the early 20th century, pigeons carried messages of safe arrival or distress from boats traveling between Havana and Key West of Florida. During both World Wars, pigeons were used for the quick conveyance of intelligence. The birds were suited up with ciphered papers and sent across enemy lines to relay news of troop movements, or communicate with resistance workers in occupied countries. These winged spies bore names such as the Mocker, Spike, Steady, the Colonel's Lady, and Cher Ami, who, according to Levi, completed her mission despite a broken leg and breastbone suffered en route. There was a bird named President Wilson, who lost his left leg in the Great War. And Winkie of Scotland, who crashed with his bomber crew in the North Sea. Winkie was released from the ruined aircraft, and in a twinkling flew 120 miles to his loft near Dundee, alerting the air base there, which sent rescue aircraft to save the marooned bomber crew. At its peak in World War II, the U.S. Pigeon Service possessed 54,000 birds. "We breed for intelligence and stamina," explained one handler. "What we want is a bird that will get back, one that won't get flustered, one that is intelligent enough to be self-reliant. Now and then we get dumbbells, of course. You can spot them early. They don't know enough to get back in the loft or they sit in a corner and sulk. But most pigeons," he said, "are intelligent. Highly intelligent." Among the most celebrated of these winged messengers was G.I. Joe. Dispatched by the British to abort a scheduled bombing of a German-held town because a brigade of 1,000 or more British troops was already occupying it, Joe made the 20-mile flight in 20 minutes, halting the bombers just as they were warming up for takeoff. Then there was Julius Caesar, a blue checker-splashed cock, who was parachuted out of Rome and released in southern Italy, where he took off in a southerly route to his loft in Tunisia with vital information for the North Africa campaign. And Jungle Joe, a gallant 4-month-old bronze cock, who flew 225 miles against strong wind currents and over some of the highest mountains in Asia to deliver a message, That led to the capture of large parts of Burma by Allied troops. Officials in Cuba still use the birds to transmit election results from remote mountainous areas, and the Chinese have lately built a force of 10,000 messenger pigeons to deliver military communications between troops stationed along their borders. In case of electromagnetic interference or a collapse in our signals, as the officer in charge of the pigeon army explains, it is frequently affirmed that the carrier pigeon finds its way without the exercise of intelligence or observation, and merely by the aid of some incomprehensible instinct, wrote Charles Dickens in 1850. But from my own observations, I am convinced this is a mistake. Darwin, Dickens's contemporary, proposed that pigeons might somehow register the snaking route of their outward journey and then use this information to figure out their homeward route. Now we know that's not so. Even pigeons who have traveled a circuitous route inside rotating drums in a sealed vehicle can make their way home from an unfamiliar point of release, not by retracing a route but by more or less direct flights. Returning to a known location over familiar ground is one thing, true navigation is something else. It's the ability to choose the right direction to a goal from an unfamiliar place using only cues present locally, not those gleaned by having flown the route before. We rely on technology for this, GPS and map software that tell us exactly where we are anywhere on Earth, and how to get from where we are to where we want to go. Birds, it seems, have their own internal positioning systems, which, like GPS, may indeed be global. To see if birds are truly navigating, scientists put them on boats and planes and drive them around in cars to land them in a distant, unfamiliar place with no clue of distance or direction. Then they release the birds and watch how they reorient. It's called a displacement study, and it's a powerful tool to investigate true navigation. Scientists suspect that pigeons and other birds navigate using a two-step map and compass strategy. First, they determine where they are at the point of release and which way they need to travel to get home. Then they use landmarks or celestial or environmental directional cues as a compass to keep them on the straight and narrow. The whole system, including both map and compass, appears to consist of multiple elements involving different types of information: sun, stars, magnetic fields, landscape features, wind, and weather. The compass part is fairly well understood, due in large part to thousands of studies depriving birds of one sense or another, displacing them, and then. Pigeons, like humans, are eye-minded creatures. It would be surprising if they didn't use that grove of gnarled oak trees, that oxbow curve in the river, that hedgerow or weird triangular skyscraper, to home in on their lofts. And, it turns out, they do, at least on the very last leg of their journey. The sun helps, too. Like bees, pigeons use the sun as a compass with the help of a precise little internal clock possessed by all birds. The internal clock gives them a sense of time, so that at any point in the day they know where the sun should be. But to use the sun as a compass in navigation, a young pigeon must learn its path. She does this by observing the sun's arc at different times of day, learning how fast it moves, about 15 degrees per hour, and internalizing a representation of the arc. If she's exposed to the sun only in the morning, she can't use it to navigate in the afternoon. She calibrates her sun compass daily, perhaps using the polarized light visible near the horizon at sunset. Once she masters this use of sunlight, she favors it over other cues. Even within a couple of miles of her home loft, she will rely not on familiar landmarks but on her sun compass. But here's the wonder, even pigeons whose vision is masked with frosted lenses can orient homeward, all the way to their loft. According to Charles Walcott, a professor emeritus of ornithology at Cornell University, when birds with frosted lenses approach their loft, they come in high and sort of helicopter down. Something else guides them. More than 40 years ago, William Keaton of Cornell University showed that under overcast conditions, pigeons fitted with little magnetic bars become disoriented and home more slowly than controls. Earth is like a giant magnet. Magnetic lines of force, or field lines, emanate from its poles, weakening and flattening as they near the equator. Birds seem to be able to detect even tiny changes in the inclination, or vertical angle, of the magnetic field and may use these to determine their latitude. The first hint that magnetic fields might guide birds in their journeys came from experiments in the late 1960s, with caged European robins. The birds were kept in rooms isolated from any outdoor environmental cues. European robins normally migrate south from northern Europe to southern Europe and Africa. During their period of migratory restlessness, called Zugunruh, the captive birds, their hearts racing as if to power flight, consistently seemed to want to escape toward the south, though they had no visual clues as to where south might be. When scientists wrapped their cages in electromagnetic coils, the birds were confused and shifted the direction of their fluttering and hopping. Lots of creatures, from bees to whales, perceive magnetic fields and use them to orient. However, we're still not certain how animals sense the fields. Detecting them with sensitive electronic instruments is one thing. But sensing magnetic fields as weak as that of the Earth is not easy using only biological materials, says Henrik Moritzen, a biologist who studies the mechanisms underlying animal navigation at the University of Oldenburg in Germany. Birds possess no obvious sense organ devoted to the task. But because the field can pervade tissue, the sensors may be hidden deep within their bodies. One model holds that birds see magnetic fields with special molecules in the retina activated by certain wavelengths of light. Magnetic signals seem to affect the chemical reactions of these molecules, either speeding them up or slowing them down, depending on the direction of the magnetic field. In response, the retinal nerves fire signals to the visual areas of a bird's brain, making it aware of the field's direction. It all occurs at the subatomic level, involving the spinning of electrons, which suggests something extraordinary. Birds may be capable of sensing quantum effects. The sensing seems to involve a part of the forebrain linked to the eyes, known as cluster N. If cluster N is damaged, birds can no longer sense which way is north. What would they actually see? It's hard to know. Perhaps a ghostly pattern of spots, or of light and shade, that would remain in place as the bird moves its head from side to side. A second theory suggests that a magnetic sensor made of tiny crystals of iron oxide, kind of like a compass needle, may be lodged somewhere in a bird's body. This sensor would detect gradients in a magnetic field and translate them into a neuronal impulse. Not long ago, scientists thought they had found just such minute magnetic sensors in the beaks of pigeons, specifically, in 6 clusters of iron-rich cells they found in the nasal cavity of the birds' upper beaks. But when researchers looked further, poring over 250,000 tissue slices from the beaks of almost 200 pigeons, something didn't add up. The number of these iron-bearing cells varied widely from bird to bird. One pigeon had only 200, another, more than 100,000, and another, with a beak infection, had tens of thousands located smack dab at the site of the infection. The iron-rich cells appear not to be sensory cells at all but white blood cells known as macrophages, which are simply recycling iron from the red blood cells they engulf. End of story? Not exactly. New evidence suggests that magnetoreceptors somewhere in a bird's upper beak close to the skin are involved in recording magnetic intensity, which varies with latitude. Severing the nerve that links a bird's beak with its brain sabotages its ability to establish its position. But just what is detecting the magnetism, and where in the beak it exists, remains a mystery. To confound the picture, another possible niche for magnetoreceptors emerged recently, this time, in tiny balls of iron found inside hair cells, sensory neurons within a bird's inner ear, suggesting that birds may hear magnetic fields. However, removing the inner ear of homing pigeons has no effect on their ability to home. Wherever the sensor may be, it appears to be extraordinarily sensitive. In 2014, Moritzen and his team reported in Nature that even extremely weak electromagnetic noise, generated by human electronic devices in urban environments, may disrupt the magnetic compasses of migrating European robins. We're not talking cell towers or high-voltage transmission lines here, more like the background buzz of everything run by electrical currents. This news caused some shock waves in the scientific world. If it's true, this kind of electrosmog, as it's known, may already be causing birds' navigational problems serious enough to affect their survival. For a long time scientists thought that a bird's magnetic compass was just a kind of backup system for overcast days. Far from it. Together with the sun compass, it's essential to their navigational system. So maybe birds harbor different types of magnetoreceptors that work together, allowing them to sense even the tiniest fluctuations in magnetic fields. Parsimonious as birds may be, perhaps in this department they go a little overboard, so that, for instance, a pigeon flying over the Mediterranean Sea on a moonless night might find its way to a dovecot in North Africa. So much for the compass piece of the puzzle. To navigate, a bird also needs something akin to a map to determine its position at the start of its journey, and where that space is in relation to where it's going so it can head in the right direction. Do birds have such a thing? A map inside the mind? The idea goes back to the 1940s, when Edward Tolman, a psychologist at the University of California, Berkeley, first proposed that mammals might possess a cognitive map of their spatial environment. Tolman observed that rats in special mazes were able to figure out new, more direct routes or shortcuts to destinations that held a food reward. In the course of learning, said Tolman, something like a field map of the environment gets established in the rat's brain, indicating routes, paths, blind alleys, and environmental relationships, which the rats may later call on. Tolman proposed that humans, too, build such cognitive maps, and bravely suggested that these maps help us navigate not only space but the social and emotional relationships in that great God-given maze that is our human world. A narrow-minded map can lead one to devalue others and in the end to desperately dangerous hates of outsiders, ranging in expression from discrimination against minorities to world conflagrations, Tolman wrote. The solution? Create broader cognitive maps in the mind that encompass bigger geographical boundaries and a wider social scope, embracing those we might consider other, and in this way encourage empathy and understanding. The discovery that birds might make mental maps of their physical surroundings, if not their social and emotional ones, came from putting pigeons to the same sort of maze tests Tolman used. Like rats, it turns out, pigeons have an excellent memory for spatial information. They remember landmarks they've visited before, how far apart they are and in what direction they lie, and they use this information to guide them to new locations. It's called small-scale navigation, and some birds are very good at it, indeed. The champs are those scatter-hoarding birds such as Clark's nutcrackers and western scrub jays. These members of the crow family are masters of the spatial memory game on a colossal scale. Clark's nutcrackers, light gray, crow-shaped birds with handsome black wings, are nicknamed camp robbers for their habit of scrounging in campsites. They are native to the Rocky Mountains and other high regions of western North America. To survive the harsh winters there, a single nutcracker will gather more than 30,000 pine seeds in a single summer, carrying up to 100 seeds at a time in a special large pouch under its tongue. These it buries in up to 5,000 different caches scattered throughout a territory of dozens, even hundreds, of square miles. Then later it finds the scattered treasures. Nutcrackers recall the locations of their own individual stashes and will go directly to them without expending a lot of energy, looking elsewhere. They rely almost completely on memory to locate their personal caches, and they can remember them for as long as 9 months, despite radical changes in the appearance of the landscape across the seasons caused by snow, leaves, or shifting rock and soil. A pine seed is tiny, and so is each of the caches. The bird digs for his treasure with a very small shovel indeed, his dagger-like bill, and striking his target demands precision measured in millimeters. Even the slightest error in recalling the location of a cache might mean that it's never found. 7 times out of 10, a Clark's nutcracker nails it. The question is, how do they find the seeds once they've cached them? Olfactory cues play no part. One theory holds that they create a mental map of big, tall landmarks, such as trees and rocks, that won't get buried by snow. They register and remember the location of caches relative to these landmarks, using distance, direction, and even geometric rules and configurations. For instance, they might register that a cache site is situated halfway between 2 tall landmarks, or at the third point of a triangle created between the 2 landmarks and a target location. Imagine recalling 5,000 such locations. Western scrub jays, those masters of social trickery, remember not only where they stashed their caches but also what they stashed there and when. This is important because the scrub jay squirrels away not only nuts and seeds but fruit, insects, and worms, foods that perish at different rates. Cached insects can spoil in days if the temperatures are high enough, while nuts and seeds can last for months. A series of creative experiments by Nicola Clayton and her team at Cambridge University showed that the birds retrieve the more perishable food before it rots, leaving the non-perishables, such as nuts and seeds, until later. The jays use their experience of how quickly food degrades to guide their choice in recovering their caches. Remembering that perishable food items may need to be retrieved sooner requires recalling cache locations, cache contents, and the time of caching. This ability to remember the what, where, and when of specific past events is thought to be akin to human episodic memory, the remarkable capacity to remember specific personal experiences. Like us, the birds seem to be using events that happened in the past to figure